What did you make of the letters?
Oh, thanks for having me, Annalise. Look, it's a terrific moment to be able to see these letters after so long. They have been withheld from us under the embargo of the Queen, and it's a wonderful outcome that that embargo has been lifted following the High Court's decision recently. And it does mean that now our history can be fully known, that we can see what was said between the Queen and the Governor-General. The most startling thing about the letters is just how extensive the conversations between the Queen and the Governor-General leading up to the dismissal are. They're discussing matters that relate deeply to the political situation in Australia, and they even stretch into the realm that I think is troubling for many people, of advising the Governor-General regarding the use of the reserve powers, which of course he then did use. So there's a mix of things in the letters. There's an enormous holding there of over 200 letters. And the most remarkable thing is simply that we can see them. This is an unprecedented thing, and it's a very good thing.
Certainly was an historic day. What did you make of the statement from Buckingham Palace then saying that this proves the Queen had nothing to do with the dismissal?
Yes, it's an indication of just how important the letters are, that we've seen it's elicited a very rare public statement from Buckingham Palace, and that's another first that has been achieved through the release of these letters. What Buckingham Palace says is what they have always said about the events of 1975, and that is that they had no role in the decision that was taken by Sir John Kerr, the Governor-General, to dismiss the government. Now, I think we need to separate out a couple of things here. The decision itself, that is the meeting in Government House in the study with Sir John Kerr handing the dismissal letter to the Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, of course that was taken by the Governor-General himself. It couldn't be otherwise. Kerr had to make that decision. It was he who signed the letter and handed it to the head of elected government. However, having said that, what these 200 letters show beyond any doubt is this extensive involvement of the palace in the process through which Kerr made that decision. And that's a critical distinction. So there are many months of discussions leading up to the eventual decision in which they are discussing matters relating to the political situation in Australia. And the most remarkable thing is that as early as August 1975, the Queen's Private Secretary is pointing out to Sir John Kerr the existence of the reserve powers, which are the extreme powers through which a Governor-General can remove an elected government from office. And I think in the week before the dismissal, actually pointedly on the 4th and 5th of November 1975, makes very clear his view that those reserve powers exist and that Sir John Kerr could, in some circumstances, use them.
So you think that indicates that at least the monarchy was encouraging this course of action?
I wouldn't go so far to say it's encouraging it, but I think the fact is that the comments they were making to Kerr regarding the reserve powers clearly had an influence on Kerr's decision-making. I mean, it had to. That's why he had engaged with them in discussions about the prospective use of the reserve powers. And it has to be remembered, and this is a critical context, that at all times, Sir John Kerr, the Governor-General, was not speaking to the Prime Minister about this. There's a yawning gap in these letters, which is the required and constitutionally expected role of the Prime Minister in this process that Kerr was going through. Kerr should have been taking the advice of the Prime Minister. He should have been taking the advice of the law officers, that is, the Attorney General and the Solicitor General. Instead, he's taking the advice of many people, including the palace.
That is one of the really remarkable things about this, is these documents, they're contemporaneous, there's no benefit of hindsight in them, they're factually what happened at the time, primary sources. But do you think there is more to this picture? There would have been other kinds of communication, phone calls, cables, that could help colour in some of those issues?
Well, we know that there were telephone conversations. There's no doubt about that. The then official secretary of government of the Governor-General, Mr. David Smith, as he was then, has indicated that there were telephone conversations with Buckingham Palace, again unknown to the Prime Minister. I think I think we need to put this in the context of the extraordinary secrecy of the events of 1975. And that's always been one of the really troubling aspects of it, that the government of the day was deceived, that the Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, had no warning, absolutely no warning of the possibility of this. In fact, Kerr had led him to believe otherwise. And, of course, the critical fact that Gough Whitlam was to call an election, a half-Senate election, on the day of 11th of November 1975. That is why he was at Yarralumla that afternoon to hand Kerr the agreed statement they had discussed earlier that morning to announce the half-Senate election in the House of Representatives that afternoon. So the fact that he was in that context removed from office without warning is really, I think, the nub of the contention over the dismissal of the Whitlam government.
This was years in the making for you. What do you make? How does it feel at this point to have had this kind of success after just what's been a protracted battle, and what kind of impact do you think this is going to have on the history books?
It's an absolutely astonishing experience to be able to take this case to the High Court, and I must thank all of the legal team who worked on a pro bono basis. It's been a mighty team effort, and it's been an extraordinary success. It's a very rare success to be able to overturn royal secrecy in this way. Royal archives are usually under a vice-like grip of the royal family in the Royal Archives in Windsor, and I think this may well lead to other cases where former Dominions seek access to their own archives, as we have. And I think that's made a really significant impact on history. It will, without doubt, necessitate rewriting aspects of the history of the dismissal of the Whitlam government, because we've never before had the benefit of knowing what was said between the Queen and the Governor-General in the months before the dismissal, and now, of course, we do.
What made you want to pursue this?
Well, I'd worked for many years on both Gough Whitlam's biography, a 2-volume biography in the first instance, and I followed that up with a book specifically about the dismissal dossier. And over that long period of research, which stretched to nearly 10 years, I spent a lot of time looking through Sir John Kerr's archives, which are in the National Archives, most of which are open. And those archives have been absolutely critical for history. They've revealed some extraordinary things that were previously obviously unknown, including the critical role of the then High Court Justice Sir Anthony Mason. That was completely unknown until I located Kerr's record of their discussions and their meetings, and that quickly became a very important part of our understanding of the dismissal. And there was one group of letters in Kerr's papers that I was unable to access, which is these palace letters. So I did know that they were critically important. Kerr refers to them many times throughout his papers. He quotes from some of them. There are some extracts from some of the letters among his papers. So it was very clear that these were absolutely essential documents, and that if there was any way to open them for the Australian public, I would pursue that, and I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to do that.